In professional wrestling, a grudge usually has an expiration date. It lasts until the pay-per-view, until the merchandise is sold, until the script demands that everybody moves on. But sometimes the machinery breaks. An offhand comment escapes into the wild, a grievance calcifies, and a rivalry is born not in a writer's room, but in the quiet, bitter space between two men who refuse to let something go. For 12 years, CM Punk and Roman Reigns were tethered together by an accident. They didn't share a ring. For most of a decade, they didn't even share an employer. Instead, they fought a shadow war, waged in podcast quotes, media shots, and the unspoken tension of a torch that was never actually passed. Then, in February 2026, the distance finally collapsed. Roman Reigns stood in a WWE ring, looked directly at CM Punk, and said something that didn't quite sound like a wrestling promo. I will never forget 10 years ago or so when you go on your little best friend's podcast running your mouth, making my life harder than it ever should have been. Performed anger has a shape, a crowd to work, a destination it's meant to reach. This was quieter. The specific quietness of someone who has been waiting years to say something out loud and is finally in the room with the right person. CM Punk's answer was that he had no regrets. They barely shared a program across most of that decade. Most of it happened in podcasts and press appearances, in words thrown from a comfortable distance that kept finding their target anyway. Something that started long before either of them was ready to call it anything. In a production meeting in late 2012, where a corporate hand reached into an artist's work and changed one name, the artist shrugged. He had what he needed. What he had instead was fine. Both of them have spent 12 years fighting about what that moment meant. The argument is still going. The production meeting happened in late 2012, and it was unglamorous in the way that all origin stories are unglamorous before anyone knows their origin stories. $100 paydays actually meant something. He had an idea, a mercenary faction. 3 men operating outside the traditional hierarchy, brought in to protect the champion. His faction, his concept, his names. Dean Ambrose, Seth Rollins, Chris Hero. Most of the time in WWE, you pitch something, and by the time it comes out the other end of the corporate machine, you barely recognize what you started with. Committee notes, executive adjustments, the slow sanding down of anything that came from a performer rather than a boardroom. Punk had lost that fight more times than he could count. This time, the pitch landed clean. Vince McMahon liked it. Triple H liked it. The faction was approved. Then Triple H said no to Chris Hero. They had someone else in mind. Someone younger. Roman Reigns. 27 years old, built like a Greek statue. 3rd generation Samoan wrestling royalty. Son of Sika, cousin of The Rock. He'd been in developmental for 2 years, and the people with the better suits had looked at him and made a decision on potential alone. Punk shrugged and let it happen. He wasn't wrong to shrug. There was nothing to be done, and at the time, it felt like a minor adjustment rather than a reordering of the universe. He waved the kid through the door. The Shield debuted at Survivor Series 2012. They descended from the crowd in tactical gear, put Ryback through an announcer's table with a synchronized powerbomb, and saved Punk's championship in a way that felt genuinely menacing. 3 men, 2 of whom Punk chose, 1 of whom the company chose for him. And then the Shield became something nobody expected. Ambrose was uncontainable, volatile and strange and impossible to look away from. He was a freight train who had learned how to be patient, the nuclear option who waited to be used correctly. Within a year, all 3 of them were more important to the company than anyone had admitted when they started. Within 2 years, they were 3 of the biggest stars on the roster. Within a decade, the Shield was being described as one of the greatest factions in the history of professional wrestling. 2 years later, the Pretty Boy was the most dangerous member of the faction Punk conceived, which meant the faction had outgrown him. Everything after that was just a matter of time. By late 2013, Punk had turned face, and the Shield had defected to management's side, which meant they were headed toward each other. And before the tables, ladders, and chairs pay-per-view, a 3-on-1 handicap match, Punk against all of them, the instruction came down from production: make Roman look strong. Punk won anyway. survived 13 minutes, pinned one of them through their own miscommunication, escaped. 3 weeks later, January 6, 2014, the singles match. Punk works the body early, uses submissions to neutralize the size difference. Reigns absorbs it all and keeps coming. Punk hits the GTS, the go to sleep, the finisher he's used to beat everyone, and Reigns kicks out. Reigns delivers the spear, 3 count. Roman Reigns pins CM Punk, one-on-one, clean. The only member of the Shield to do so. 3 weeks after that, the 2014 Royal Rumble. Punk has a miserable night, gets eliminated in a finish that felt like punishment, and then goes home. Doesn't give notice, doesn't come back the next week, just leaves. And for months, nobody knows if he's coming back at all. He went home for a lot of reasons: exhaustion, injury, a decade of fighting a company that he felt had never quite committed to him. But part of it, I think, was this. He had looked up and seen the kid he'd waved through the door being positioned as the future. And the worst thing about it wasn't that it was wrong. The worst thing was that it might be right. That the company he'd spent his whole career trying to expose was going to keep running, and it was going to run on someone they had chosen. Someone Punk hadn't. He sat with that for 10 months. Then he picked up a microphone. November 2014. Colt Cabana's podcast, Art of Wrestling, 2 episodes released days apart. The first one is what everyone remembers: the creative frustrations, the medical negligence, the Vince McMahon stories, the accumulated bitterness of a man who gave the company everything and felt the company gave him something short of that back. It detonated. Millions of people heard it. It's still one of the most consequential pieces of audio professional wrestling has ever produced. The part about Reigns came in the follow-up episode, and this is the detail that changes the shape of everything. Punk wasn't going after Roman Reigns. He was going after WWE's micromanagement. He told a story about being pulled aside before the TLC match and being told, repeatedly, that he had to make Reigns look really, really strong. His response, basically, was, yeah, I was just going to tear through all 3 of them and GTS them at the same time, but sure, I get it. A company that couldn't trust the performer they'd paid to carry their title for 434 days. 434 nights in a body that kept its own running total of what the work cost. 434 mornings waking up to prove something to a company he believed would never quite commit to him in return. Make Roman look strong. 4 words, detached from the exasperation that produced them, became a rallying cry. A conspiracy theory that fit inside the pre-existing frustrations of audiences who already resented Reigns' push like a key into a lock. Every time Reigns won a match, the phrase surfaced. Every title reign looked like evidence. Every crowd reaction looked managed rather than earned. The audience had been handed a story about Roman Reigns that made every win look like corporate engineering, and they chose that story over the show happening in front of their faces. It showed up in concrete, unmistakable ways. When Reigns won the 2015 Royal Rumble in Philadelphia, designed as his coronation, the company's declaration of where they were going, the crowd howled. 18,000 people who had already decided. Daniel Bryan's name echoing around the Wells Fargo Center like a verdict. The Rock, who has commanded rooms for 30 years, could not fix it. His presence only made it worse, because it looked like reinforcements. Reigns stood in the ring that night and heard 18,000 people boo him for a story he didn't write. But Punk may not have been aiming at him at all. The heat between them probably started as a misunderstanding. Punk was telling a story about being micromanaged by a company that couldn't trust its own performers. Reigns was just a name in that story. Collateral damage in an argument Punk was having with management. But the quote escaped its context. It reached audiences who were already angry about Reigns' push. And what they did with it, what they turned 4 words into, was the thing that followed Reigns into every arena for the next 3 years. And Reigns heard it as deliberate. Of course he did. The years of media appearances where he took shots at Punk, the wasn't as good as Cena, didn't move the needle like The Rock. Those came from a man who genuinely believed another man had gone out of his way to make his career harder. I will never forget 10 years ago or so, when you go on your little best friend's podcast, running your mouth, making my life harder than it ever should have been. That sentence doesn't come from a character. You can hear the difference. Performed anger has a shape, a crowd to feed, a destination it's aimed at. This is something quieter. The resentment of someone who spent years rebuilding his career around a story someone else told about him. A story that might not have even been about him, and who had to wait a decade before he was finally in the same room as the person who told it. Neither of them had the full picture. Reigns heard it as deliberate, spent the next 6 years carrying that into every arena, every boo, every night Philadelphia wouldn't stop coming up. Roman Reigns walks out in front of a live audience. The crowd that spent 3 years making his life difficult goes completely still. And then they cheer. Not the conflicted, ironic cheer of wrestling fandom, just people, recognizing a human being in pain, reacting the way people do when someone is suffering. For the first time in years, the character dissolved, and the man inside it became visible. Which meant, for the first time in his career, he had to figure out who he was without the audience telling him. He came back as someone else. New music, new suit, a silence behind the eyes that wasn't there before. The tribal chief. He walked to the ring with a stillness that wasn't performed, and over the next 3.5 years, he did something I don't think anyone fully predicted. He became the most dominant champion in the company's modern era. Nearly 4 years, the longest title reign in WWE's modern history. A number that sounds abstract until you try to hold its actual weight. The pay-per-views, the defenses, the opponents who came for him and left with nothing. Brock Lesnar, John Cena, Edge, Seth Rollins, Sami Zayn, members of his own family. Every single one of those victories felt like a chapter in an argument he was building for himself, not the crowd. The tribal chief character had one idea at its core: control. Who stands beside you? Who you trust? What loyalty actually costs? And underneath all the spectacle, the family drama, the ceremonies, the bloodline, there was a man building the most elaborate possible answer to something CM Punk had said on a podcast years earlier. That he wasn't enough. That the company never had to bend for him. None of that happens without the podcast. The boos in Philadelphia didn't kill Roman Reigns. They gave him something to prove himself against. And when Punk sat down with a microphone in November 2014, he handed Reigns the fullest possible version of that thing. The Tribal Chief is CM Punk's greatest creative contribution to professional wrestling. CM Punk returns to professional wrestling in August 2021 in Chicago. The reaction when his music hits is one of the loudest things wrestling has produced in years. 10,000 people who had been waiting 7 years to scream, finally getting to. The night before, Roman Reigns is asked about Punk in an interview with Ariel Helwani. The answer is surgical. CM Punk wasn't as good or as over as a John Cena. Wasn't as good or as over or moved the needle like The Rock. Move the needle. A phrase from the business side of the industry. Did your presence make the thing larger? Did the numbers move because you were there? The machine bent itself around John Cena because it had no choice. It never had to do that for Punk. And Reigns, in 4 words on a podcast years earlier, had just explained why that mattered. He might be right. That's what makes it such a perfect wound to open. Punk returns to WWE in November 2023, walking out at Survivor Series wearing a grin. 7 years later, same grin. He came back, to the house Roman Reigns built. By late 2024, Roman Reigns is embroiled in a civil war within his own family. In the storyline, at least. Solo Sikoa has taken the Bloodline name, rebuilt the faction without Reigns, and declared himself the new tribal chief. Reigns needs a 5th man for a WarGames cage match at Survivor Series. And Paul Heyman, who at different points managed both of these men, the one person who sits right at the center of this whole story, has a solution. This is, notably, the first time since January 2014 that Punk and Reigns are actually sharing a program. Everything before this, the podcast, the media shots, the years of accumulated heat, happened at a distance. Now WWE puts them on the same team and asks them to function together. It goes about as well as you'd expect. When Heyman reveals Punk as the fifth man on SmackDown, the building goes sideways. Punk joins because Sikoa's faction had previously attacked Heyman, the one person in the industry Punk would apparently swallow his pride for. Reigns agrees because there's no other credible option, and a civil war is more important than a grudge. Two people stuck in an elevator with a common enemy on the other side of the door. When the time comes for the third team member to enter through the shark cage, Reigns physically puts his arm in front of Punk. Later, when it's Reigns' turn to enter, Punk steps in front of him and goes through first. The match nearly falls apart when Reigns goes for a spear and gets misdirected. He plows directly into Punk instead. The whole team collapses. Bronson Reed climbs to the top of the cage with Reigns on a table beneath him, and Punk, who has every reason to let it happen, drags Reigns out of the way. Reed crashes through the table alone. They win. They shake hands with all the warmth of a hostage negotiation. Outside the cage, Punk walks straight to Heyman. They embrace. Punk says, "We know each other. When I need the favor, I'll come asking." Heyman says, "It's yours." Reigns is standing right there. He doesn't know what was just agreed to. He knows he doesn't know. He watches the two men who built his entire world hand something back and forth between them, and there's nothing he can do about it, because the one person who could have stopped it already said yes. WrestleMania 41, Triple Threat, CM Punk versus Seth Rollins versus Roman Reigns. Three men connected to the Shield's origin, all carrying 12 years of history into a main event in Las Vegas. This is where the story cashes the check the WarGames match wrote. Punk calls in the favor on screen. He wants Heyman to leave Reigns' corner and stand in his, publicly, on the biggest stage of the year. The story delivers it. Heyman crosses the ring. Reigns loses. Rollins wins. Punk loses. Three men leave Las Vegas with nothing. Heyman genuinely managed both of them at the peak of their respective careers. The Punk-Heyman alliance in 2012 and 2013, then the years Heyman spent building the Tribal Chief. Every scripted moment in this WrestleMania build carried a weight it couldn't have manufactured from scratch. You don't need to invent stakes when the real history is sitting right there. The championship is gone. The podcast argument, whether those 4 words were sabotage or exasperation, is still unresolved. And now there's no Paul Heyman to stand between them. Just the match. January 31st, 2026, the Royal Rumble. Roman Reigns enters at number 26, eliminates everyone in his path, wins. He raises the trophy and looks directly into the camera. What follows on Monday Night Raw over the next weeks is a promo build, scripted, produced, built for television. But both men are working with material that predates the script by a decade, and you can feel the difference. Reigns leans into age. He calls Punk old, tired, a 47-year-old clinging to a spotlight he already left once, who came back to his house and now wants to take the furniture. On The Tonight Show, in a segment clearly set up to promote WrestleMania, he tells the audience that Punk is probably asleep right now, and that's exactly where he should be. Punk's answer is disarmingly honest. He agrees he's old. He says he's old enough to have watched Roman Reigns make every mistake he still makes. Something more uncomfortable than a comeback. One that lands because it might actually be true. And the fact that it's delivered on a wrestling show doesn't make it less true. In March, the story goes somewhere that no writer can fully script around. Punk invokes the death of Roman Reigns' father. Sika Inoue died in June 2024 at 79. WWE Hall of Famer. Patriarch of a wrestling dynasty that spans 3 generations. His brother, Afa, the other half of the Wild Samoans, followed him less than 2 months later. Reigns had talked about both of them the way people talk about someone when they don't have the right words. Quietly, carefully, like even saying too much would cost something. On live television, as part of a wrestling storyline, Punk tells Reigns he's going to bury him next to his father. Punk reached for it anyway. If you turn your brain fully analytical about it, you can see the logic. Punk needs Reigns angry. A Reigns who is thinking clearly, who is calm and controlled, is a Reigns that Punk's style cannot reliably beat. Punk is smaller, carries more mileage. His whole game is built on exploiting the mistakes that blind rage produces. He manufactured exactly the psychological condition he needed. The human part of your brain doesn't have to find this admirable. March 30th, Madison Square Garden. Contract signing. What erupts goes beyond what production expected. Furniture destroyed. Reigns driven through a table. Punk standing over the wreckage with a smile that had nothing warm in it. 12 years, and he hadn't softened at all. WrestleMania 42. Allegiant Stadium, Las Vegas, Nevada. The championship is real. It is also a prop. The actual thing on the line is authorship, the right to decide, once and for all, whether Make Roman Look Strong was sabotage or an accident, whether a 434-day reign was the story or just the prologue to someone else's. Roman Reigns is fighting to close an argument that someone else opened. If he beats Punk cleanly, the phrase, "make Roman look strong," finally means something different than it has meant for a decade. It stops being evidence that he was always just a corporate product. It becomes, instead, an instruction that was just telling the truth. The 434-day champion who looked at him and saw a teaching aid loses to the man who was supposed to be the student. CM Punk is fighting for something harder to name. He spent his career building a mythology around being the outsider, the artist the company couldn't contain, the voice the industry didn't want to hear. And then the company kept running. The man he'd waved through the door became the biggest star in its modern history. And Punk came back. He came back. Every day he holds the championship in the house Reigns built, he's making one argument, that what he brought was real. That the needle moved even when the numbers said otherwise. That the story he told about himself was the true one. One man's casual dismissal built the exact monster he now has to beat. This entire 12-year war exists because CM Punk decided not to take someone seriously. In 2012, he looked at a rookie and saw a prop, not a rival. 2 years later, a stray grievance on a podcast became a four-word weapon that haunted Reigns for a decade. Reigns spent years believing the sabotage was deliberate. Punk treated him like collateral damage. What Punk did was colder than malice. He didn't think about Roman Reigns at all. In Las Vegas, one of them will lose. The winner gets to call it a verdict. A Shrug in 2012 did all of that.